Most people assume the Christmas story is one story: a manger, shepherds, wise men, a star, a flight to Egypt. It all blends together on Christmas cards. But what happens when you read Matthew and Luke side by side? You don't get one story. You get two stories that contradict each other on almost every point. Let's look at each account on its own terms before we compare them. In Matthew's Gospel, the family appears to already live in Bethlehem. There's no mention of Nazareth as their home. Magi, wise men or astrologers from the east, not kings as tradition says, see a star, travel to Jerusalem, and consult King Herod. Herod directs them to Bethlehem. They find the child in a house, not a stable, and present their gifts. Then Joseph receives a dream warning. Herod plans to kill the child. The family flees to Egypt and stays there until Herod dies, possibly years later. When they finally return, Joseph intends to go back to Bethlehem, their home, but he learns that Herod's son Archelaus now rules Judea, so he diverts to Nazareth in Galilee as a last resort. Right? In Matthew's telling, Nazareth is a plan B. The family ends up there only to avoid danger. Luke tells a completely different story. Nazareth is explicitly Mary's hometown from the start. The entire pregnancy happens there. Mary travels south to visit her relative Elizabeth in the hill country of Judea, then returns to Nazareth. Later, a Roman census forces the family to travel to Bethlehem, Joseph's ancestral town. Jesus is born there in a stable or manger because there's no room at the inn. Shepherds from nearby fields visit the newborn. After the birth, Luke lays out a precise sequence governed by Jewish law. On day 8, circumcision, then a purification period, about 33 days, as prescribed in Leviticus chapter 12 for a male child. The family then travels to Jerusalem for the temple presentation, and after that, Luke says they return to Nazareth, their own city. No Egypt, no flight, no years in exile, straight home. Place both accounts next to each other, and the contradictions become systematic. Where does the family live? Bethlehem in Matthew, Nazareth in Luke. Why are they in Bethlehem? They already live there in Matthew. A census brings them in Luke. Birth setting, a house versus a stable. Visitors, magi versus shepherds. After the birth, flight to Egypt versus temple presentation and return to Nazareth. Now let's look at exactly where they collide. The timeline problem is the most decisive. Luke's post-birth sequence is locked in by Jewish law, circumcision on day 8, purification wrapping up around day 40, temple presentation in Jerusalem, then direct return to Nazareth. That entire 40-day window is accounted for. Matthew requires a flight to Egypt before Herod dies, and the family stays there for an extended period, possibly years. There is no gap in Luke's timeline to insert an Egypt detour. The common harmonization attempt goes like this. Maybe the Egypt trip happened after the temple visit on day 40, but that doesn't work either. In Matthew, the Magi visit triggers Herod's massacre of infants. The family flees to save the child's life. That urgency makes no sense 40 days after the birth. And Matthew's Magi visit a house in Bethlehem, not a family passing through town for a census. The two sequences are mutually exclusive. Beyond the timeline, there's the home base problem. Matthew and Luke are solving opposite puzzles. In Matthew, the family lives in Bethlehem. The entire plot explains how they ended up in Nazareth through exile in Egypt and the last-minute diversion. In Luke, the family lives in Nazareth, and the entire plot explains how Jesus came to be born in Bethlehem through a census that forced a temporary trip. One author moves the family from Bethlehem to Nazareth. The other moves them from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Right? These are opposite explanatory directions, not complementary details. So why do both authors place Jesus' birth in Bethlehem? The answer lies in Micah chapter 5, verse 2, an Old Testament prophecy stating that a future ruler of Israel would come from Bethlehem. Both Matthew and Luke had a theological need to connect Jesus to this prophecy, even though he was widely known as Jesus of Nazareth. They each invented an independent solution. Matthew made Bethlehem the family's home. Luke created a census to get them there. Some viewers will say these accounts are complementary. They just tell different parts of the same story, but they don't just add different details. They contradict on where the family lives, what happens after the birth, and where they go next. Luke's timeline actively excludes Matthew's Egypt narrative. The visitor difference, magi versus shepherds, is a symptom of the larger incompatibility, not the core issue. Most historians conclude that we know very little about the circumstances of Jesus' birth. What we can say with confidence is that he was from Nazareth. It's in his name. The Bethlehem traditions are independent theological constructions by two authors who never coordinated their stories. Read Matthew chapters 1 and 2, then Luke chapters 1 and 2 back to back. The nativity scene on your mantle is a harmonization that neither Matthew nor Luke would recognize. Understanding that is the first step toward reading these texts on their own terms.